In the grand hall of the Varelian Empire, a blade stood at the center, shining softly under the light of 1,000 floating crystals. The sword was known across galaxies as the Sword of Silence, a weapon no being had ever lifted, not even the strongest of the Empire's warriors. It was said to be forged by the first ones, the ancient beings who shaped the stars themselves every cycle. Warriors from countless worlds came to try their strength, but all failed. Some broke their bones trying to move it, others fell unconscious as its energy rejected them, and every time the Varelian nobles laughed, certain that no one alive was worthy. On this day, the hall was more crowded than ever. The Varelian princess Lyra sat upon a raised throne, her silver skin glimmering like moonlight, her golden eyes filled with amusement. She was young, proud, and known for her sharp tongue. Beside her, alien nobles whispered, trading bets and gossip, waiting for another fool to fail. Lyra raised her hand and spoke. "Let the next challenger step forward." A tall reptilian warrior walked up, his armor shining, his claws gripping the sword's hilt. He grunted, strained, and roared, but the sword didn't move. It pulsed with faint blue light, then went silent again. The crowd laughed, and Lyra smirked. "Another one who thinks muscle is everything." When the reptilian was carried away, a soft voice echoed through the hall. "I'd like to try." Heads turned and silence fell. From the back of the crowd stepped a human, tall but calm, dressed not in armor but in a simple flight suit. His name was Elias, a representative from Earth. Invited only as an observer, humans were new to the Galactic Council, known more for their curiosity than power. Lyra leaned forward, her lips curling into a mocking smile. "You, a human?" she said, her voice dripping with disbelief. The nobles laughed again, some whispering that the human must be mad. But Elias didn't flinch, he simply walked toward the sword with quiet steps. As he approached, the light of the crystals dimmed slightly. He stopped before the blade and looked at it, not with greed or fear, but with respect. He whispered something under his breath, something no one could hear. Lyra crossed her legs, her tone playful. "Do you even know what that is?" "That sword has burned kings alive." Elias looked up at her, his eyes calm and steady. "Maybe it's waiting for someone who doesn't want to use it," he said. The crowd chuckled again, some shouting for him to give up before he embarrassed himself. But Elias only smiled faintly and placed his hand on the hilt. For a moment nothing happened, then the air shifted. A low hum filled the hall, like the sound of a heartbeat beneath the floor. The crystals above flickered, and a soft wind blew through the chamber. Though no doors were open, Lyra frowned, her amusement fading. The runes on the blade began to glow, bright blue lines running up the sword's length. The floor trembled, cracks spreading beneath Elias's feet. Gasps filled the hall as the sword began to lift, effortlessly like a feather caught in the breeze. Elias stood straight, the sword rising in his grasp as energy swirled around him. The crowd screamed, some falling to their knees, others backing away in fear. Lyra stood frozen, her golden eyes wide, her breath caught in her throat. She had mocked him only moments ago, and now she could not look away. The runes on the walls lit up, speaking in a language long forgotten. A voice deep and echoing filled the air. "The worthy has come." Every creature in the hall felt it inside their minds, vibrating in their bones. Even Lyra, proud and untouchable, fell to her knees as the sword's energy washed over her. Elias didn't understand what was happening, but he felt no pain. It was as if the sword accepted him, its warmth spreading through his veins. He looked at Lyra, who stared back in disbelief, her voice shaking. "Impossible. That sword was forged for gods," the voice spoke again, louder this time. "He carries the heart of one." With that, the trembling stopped and silence returned. The nobles were speechless, their arrogance shattered in a single moment. The sword's glow dimmed, leaving only faint light pulsing in its core. Elias lowered it gently as if it were alive, and stepped back. Lyra rose slowly, still unable to believe her eyes. For centuries, no Varelian, no warlord, no champion could move that sword, and yet a human, a fragile being from a young world, had done the impossible. She looked at him with a mix of anger, fear, and something else she couldn't name. Elias met her gaze, his expression calm but curious. "I didn't take it," he said quietly. "It came to me." The words hung in the air,
heavy with meaning for the first time in her life. Lyra,
the proud princess of the Empire, had no reply. She had laughed at the human's attempt. But now she was the one left speechless. The Sword of Silence had chosen, and its choice would shake the galaxy forever. The hall was silent. Only the faint hum of the sword echoed through the air. The nobles stood frozen like statues, afraid to even breathe. Elias held the blade with both hands, the glow dancing around his arms like living light. The runes along the walls pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. It was as if the ancient hall itself had awakened after a long slumber. Then, with a deep rumble, the crystal ceiling cracked, scattering beams of blue light across the room. Lyra's voice broke the silence, her tone trembling between fear and anger. "What have you done, human?" she shouted, stepping forward. Elias looked up, still calm, his eyes reflecting the blade's light. "I didn't do anything," he said softly. "The sword? It moved on its own." But his words did little to comfort the terrified crowd. Guards rushed forward, their armor gleaming. Plasma rifles raised toward Elias. Lyra raised her hand, trying to control them. But the panic had already spread. One of the soldiers fired a warning shot, a bright streak of energy cutting through the air. The blast struck the invisible field surrounding Elias and vanished like smoke. The sword shimmered, and in the same instant, every weapon in the hall overheated, melting in the guards' hands. Screams filled the chamber as soldiers dropped their rifles. Clutching burned palms, Elias looked horrified. "I didn't mean to," he tried to explain. But the sword hummed louder. The floor cracked again, sending shockwaves through the entire palace outside. The twin suns flickered as energy rippled across the capital. Ancient symbols appeared on the floor beneath Elias, forming a circle of light that stretched to the walls. It looked like a language no one had seen for 1,000 years. The air shimmered as if reality itself was bending. Then the voice returned, deep and ancient, speaking inside every mind. "The worthy awakens the bond of stars." Lyra fell back, covering her ears though the sound came from within. She had studied the legends of the first ones, but never believed them to be true. They were said to have forged weapons tied to the will of creation itself. And now one such weapon stood in the hands of a human, a fragile being from a forgotten world that the galaxy barely respected. Her heart raced, fear mixing with something else, wonder. She had mocked him moments ago, but now she felt small before him, not because of his strength, but because of the calm fire in his eyes. Elias didn't look like a conqueror. He looked like someone who carried a burden too heavy for anyone to bear. The throne behind Lyra cracked as another wave of energy surged. The nobles screamed, some fleeing, others falling to their knees in awe. The hall lights burst, plunging the chamber into a dim blue glow from the sword alone. Elias stepped forward, the ground shaking with each movement. His voice was soft but steady. "It's speaking to me. It says the silence is broken." Lyra's breath caught. "What silence?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Elias turned toward her, his expression unreadable. "The silence between worlds," he said. Then his gaze drifted upward as if hearing something beyond the stars. "The void is stirring," he added quietly, and for the first time fear touched his tone. Suddenly, the sword released a burst of light, blinding everyone for a moment. When it faded, the once perfect marble walls were scarred and blackened. The ancient murals that decorated the hall now glowed faintly with hidden writing. Lyra's advisors rushed to her side, shouting orders, but she waved them away. Her focus locked on the human standing in the wreckage. He looked untouched, but the energy around him had dimmed. The sword was now calm, its light reduced to a soft pulse in the metal. Lyra stepped closer, ignoring the smoke and debris around her. "Who are you?" she asked quietly, her pride gone. Only curiosity and unease remained. Elias lowered the sword, his hand trembling slightly. "I'm just human," he said simply. "I came to see your traditions. Not to break them." Lyra's eyes narrowed, searching his face for deception but found none. The voice of the sword whispered again, this time only in Elias's mind. He froze as it said, "The ancient bond has returned. Prepare for the coming shadow." He didn't understand what it meant, but he knew it was not good. The sound faded, leaving only silence and the soft echo of his heartbeat. He looked at Lyra, trying to speak, but before he could, the entire palace trembled again. From deep below, a new sound began, a metallic hum rising from the planet's core. Lyra looked around in confusion. "That's the old network the world core hasn't activated in centuries," she said, her voice shaking. Elias turned toward the throne, the sword reacting once more. A beam of light shot upward through the roof, piercing the sky. Every ship orbiting the planet reported a strange signal coming from the royal palace. A signal written in the language of the first ones. Unreadable to modern computers, Lyra stumbled backward. Realizing what was happening, her empire had just become the center of something ancient. Something unstoppable. The sword had chosen its bearer, and its awakening had sent a message across the stars. The galaxy had been silent for too long, and now that silence was broken forever. As the beam faded, Elias looked down at his trembling hands. Whispering, "What did you just awaken?" Lyra's voice answered softly from behind him. "Not a weapon, a prophecy." The next morning, the palace still trembled with echoes of what had happened. The Sword of Silence had changed everything. Not just the hall, but the entire empire. Energy storms circled the skies. Strange symbols appeared in the clouds. The people whispered of omens, of gods returning, and of the human who had broken the silence. Every noble house wanted answers. And the Galactic Council demanded to see the man who had awakened the sword. Elias sat in a quiet chamber, guarded by soldiers who dared not look him in the eye. He didn't feel powerful. He felt heavy, as if the sword had placed a mountain on his shoulders. He could still hear the faint hum in his mind, a voice that wasn't his but spoke like an echo of memory. It whispered words in an ancient tongue he couldn't understand, but somehow felt he should. He looked at his hands and muttered, "Why me?" The door opened and Lyra stepped in, her usual confidence replaced by unease. Her armor was gone, replaced with royal robes of deep blue and silver. She stood silently for a moment before speaking, her voice softer than he had ever heard. "The council will arrive soon," she said. "They will want to question you." Elias nodded but didn't answer. Lyra crossed her arms and walked closer, her golden eyes studying him carefully. "I don't understand what happened," she said. "That sword has killed everyone who tried to lift it." Elias sighed. "Maybe it didn't want to be lifted," he said quietly. "Maybe it wanted to be heard." Lyra frowned, his words confusing her. "To be heard?" "It's a weapon, not a voice," she said. Elias shook his head. "Every weapon has a purpose, and maybe this one remembers why it was made." Lyra opened her mouth to reply but stopped, her gaze drawn to the sword lying beside him. It looked peaceful now, its glow faint, but even resting it radiated a kind of awareness. She could feel it watching, not with eyes but with intent. "You speak as if it's alive," she said. Elias looked up slowly. "What if it is?" Before she could answer, the chamber door opened again. 3 members of the Galactic Council entered, their robes shining with authority. Behind them came 2 tall guards in black armor. The lead counselor, an elder alien with crystal-like skin, spoke coldly. "You, human, are now a matter of galactic concern." Elias stood, his tone respectful. "I didn't mean to cause harm." The counselor's voice hardened. "You have awakened a relic that predates our empires, and our sensors show its energy is spreading through our networks." Lyra stepped forward, trying to shield him. "He didn't plan this," she said. But the counselor ignored her. "The first ones built these weapons to destroy worlds, and now you hold one." Elias frowned. "If it wanted to destroy, it could have done so already," he said calmly. The alien narrowed his eyes. "Or maybe it is waiting for your command." The accusation hung heavy in the air. Lyra looked between them, torn between loyalty to her people and what she had seen. Elias lowered his head. "I don't command it," he said softly. "It speaks to me. But I don't understand everything it says." The counselor leaned closer, his voice sharp. "Then tell us, human, what does it want?" Elias hesitated, the hum in his head growing stronger. He closed his eyes and whispered, "It says..." The darkness stirs again. The room fell silent. Every council member exchanging worried looks. One of them spoke nervously. "The same words are recorded in the ruins of the first world," another muttered. "Could the void creatures be returning?" Lyra looked confused. "Void creatures?" she asked. The elder nodded grimly. "Beings made of nothing but hunger and shadow. The reason the first ones vanished." Elias listened quietly. His heart sinking, the voice in his mind spoke again. "The stars remember the silence was protection. Now it is broken." He looked up and said softly, "It wasn't just a sword. It was a seal." Lyra's eyes widened. "A seal? You mean..." "Yes," Elias interrupted gently. "When I lifted it, something was released." The counselors stepped back in shock. "If that is true," the elder said, his voice shaking, "then the galaxy is in danger." Elias looked at the sword, its light flickering faintly. He could feel it warning him, guiding him. showing images in his mind, stars collapsing, shadows spreading, cries of dying worlds. He clenched his fists, whispering, "We need to stop it before it's too late." Lyra turned to the counselors. "Then we should help him. He didn't start this alone." But the elder glared at her. "You would trust a human with the power of gods?" Her voice rose. "He didn't destroy your worlds. He saved ours from ourselves." The counselors stared in silence, realizing the princess of the Varelian Empire was defending the man they feared. Finally, the elder sighed. "We will call a meeting of all empires," he said. "Until then, the human will remain under guard." Lyra wanted to argue, but stopped. Knowing it was useless for now, she turned to Elias. Her eyes filled with something she had never shown before. Respect. As the council left, Elias looked out the window, where strange shapes moved in the clouds. The storm outside wasn't just weather. It was something far older, something watching. He gripped the sword's hilt and whispered, "What did I unleash?" The sword glowed faintly and whispered back, "The past you forgot, and the future you must face." Lyra stood behind him, her voice calm but shaken. "Then we face it together." Elias looked at her, a small smile forming. "Together," he said, and as lightning split the sky above, the first shadow fell across the capital. The prophecy had already begun, though none of them truly understood. The council chamber floated high above the clouds, surrounded by walls of glass and energy shields. From there, the leaders of 12 great species gathered, their voices echoing through the massive hall. Each one spoke in fear, in anger, and confusion. The Sword of Silence had awakened after 1,000 ages, and it had chosen a human for many of them. That was the most terrifying part. The Varelian High Chancellor slammed his fist on the table, his silver armor gleaming. "This cannot stand," he shouted. "A primitive world cannot hold the power of the first ones." Another alien, a crystalline being from the Air Dominion, nodded. "The weapon's energy signatures are spreading across subspace, connecting to every ancient ruin in known space," he said. The hall filled with anxious murmurs. Only Lyra remained calm. Though her heart pounded in her chest, she had seen Elias with her own eyes. She had seen the calm strength he carried. He was not a threat, but the council saw only danger. Elias stood silently beside her. Unarmed, dressed in simple gray fabric, he felt their stares like knives. He knew what they were thinking, that humans were too unpredictable, too emotional, too dangerous. He had heard it all before, even before this chaos began. Lyra placed a hand near his arm, a silent gesture to stay calm. The Chancellor pointed toward him. "Tell us, human, what do you intend to do with that sword?" Elias took a deep breath, his voice steady. "Nothing," he said. "I don't control it, I only hear it." The council erupted in disbelief. Some shouting, some laughing bitterly. The air representative hissed, "Do you expect us to believe that?" "The sword bends to your will." Elias shook his head slowly. "It doesn't bend to mine, it listens to my heart," he said. That sentence made the hall fall quiet. Lyra looked at him, knowing those words were not arrogance but truth. The elder from the council, the same who had questioned him before, stood and walked closer. "If what you say is true, then what does it tell you now?" he asked carefully. Elias hesitated, listening to the faint hum that always lingered in his mind. He spoke softly. "It says, 'The void has opened.'" Gasps echoed across the chamber. The elder frowned deeply. "Impossible. The void worlds were sealed before our empires were born." Elias looked up, his eyes filled with quiet sorrow. "Then the seal is breaking." Outside, the sky darkened, though it was midday. Through the massive glass walls, the council saw the stars flicker like dying embers. Lyra's voice broke the silence. "The sword warned us." The darkness is returning, but the council was not united. Fear began to twist their reason. Some shouted for the humans' arrest. Others demanded the sword be destroyed. "Destroy it before it consumes us all," one screamed. "It cannot be destroyed," another argued. "It is made of pure celestial energy." The chaos grew louder until the entire hall shook at what was coming. A wave of pressure filled the room, strong enough to shatter glass. The sword, though locked away in a containment field nearby, began to glow again. The guards panicked, stepping back as symbols of blue light burned across the floor. Elias looked around, realizing the sword was reacting to their fear. Not his command, he shouted, "Stop!" "You're feeding it with panic," but it was too late. The energy burst outward, forming a sphere of light in the center of the chamber. Within the light, a vision appeared, a galaxy consumed by black fire, planets falling, stars imploding, voices screaming. It was not an attack, it was a warning. The light vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving the council stunned. One of the leaders whispered, trembling, "That was the void, it's real." Lyra looked at Elias, her face pale. "What did it show you?" she asked. Elias stared into space, his voice low. "The end," the Chancellor roared. "Then you've doomed us all." He raised his hand, signaling the guards. "Seize him now." But before they could move, the sword pulsed again, releasing a shockwave that threw everyone to the ground. When the dust settled, Elias stood unharmed, the sword floating beside him in silent defense. He didn't command it, yet it protected him. Lyra rose to her feet, her voice breaking the confusion. "Enough," she shouted. Her golden eyes burned with defiance. "He is not our enemy. He is our only chance." The Chancellor glared. "You would trust the destroyer of the seal?" She took a step forward, her voice steady. "He didn't destroy it, he woke it. And maybe that was meant to happen." The room went quiet again, her words heavy with truth. The elder counselor nodded slowly. "Perhaps the sword chose him for this very reason." He turned to Elias. "The void will come for us all. Do you know how to stop it?" Elias shook his head. "Not yet," he said. "But the sword does." The Chancellor's expression twisted in anger. But before he could reply, the alarms blared across the station. A guard rushed in, shouting, "Counselors! Incoming signal from the outer colonies. The void ships have appeared." The hall fell silent once again. Only the hum of the sword filled the air. Lyra turned to Elias, her voice trembling. "It's starting." Elias nodded, gripping the sword. "Then we must end it." The council stared as the human turned toward the windows, the reflection of the stars burning in his eyes. No longer just a stranger, no longer an outsider. He had become the spark that would decide the fate of all life. And in the dark beyond the stars, something vast and ancient began to move. The stars trembled, and every sensor in the system screamed warnings. Outside the council station, the void opened like a wound in space, twisting and pulsing with darkness from its depths. Ships unlike any known design emerged, black as shadow, moving without engines or light. They glided silently, eating the stars behind them, their presence draining power from nearby vessels. Every fleet scrambled to prepare, but weapons malfunctioned. Engines flickered and comms fell silent. Lyra stood beside Elias, her heart pounding as she stared through the massive viewing window. The darkness spread like smoke, swallowing the light of suns. "It's them," she whispered. "The void creatures." Elias felt the hum of the sword deep in his chest, louder than ever before. The runes across its blade burned white-hot. "It's not just an invasion," he said quietly. "It's hunger." The council shouted orders, panic rising in their voices. Every empire called its ships to arms. Yet even the strongest dreadnoughts could not lock targets. The darkness absorbed every attack like ripples in water. The Varelian fleet opened fire, blue plasma streams lighting the void, but each blast vanished before impact. Lyra clenched her fists. "Our weapons are useless," she said. Elias looked at her. "Not all weapons," he replied softly, and the sword flared with new light. The entire station shook as the creatures drew closer. They weren't ships, not truly. They were living voids, made of shadow and sorrow, their forms twisted, sometimes resembling beasts, sometimes storms. The sword's voice filled Elias's mind again. The silence was their prison, your touch unbounded. "Now your heart must seal it again," he gritted his teeth. "How?" he demanded. But the answer came only as a whisper. "Remember who you are." Lyra turned to him, fear flashing in her golden eyes. "Elias, what's happening?" He looked at her, his expression calm yet distant. "It's calling me," he said. "It wants me to fight." But not like before. Before she could respond, the entire station tilted as one of the creatures struck. Massive claws of darkness tore through the shields like paper. Energy sparks scattered across the ceiling. Alarms blaring, "Evacuate the council." Someone shouted, but Elias didn't move. He stepped forward, gripping the sword tightly. The blade ignited in pure light, so bright that shadows fled from the walls. Lyra stared as a wave of white fire erupted from the sword. The station's gravity stabilized and the creature outside screamed, not in sound, but in vibration. Its body cracked, and where its darkness split, stars began to shine again. The fleet stopped firing, stunned as Elias stood bathed in celestial light. The voice of the sword spoke through every mind in the system. Balance must be restored, not through destruction, but through remembrance. Elias could feel memories that weren't his filling his mind. He saw ancient humans standing beside the first ones, not as servants but as equals. He saw their fall, their silence, their return, and now the cycle had come full circle. The void creatures screamed again, waves of corruption spreading across the system. Lyra shouted, "There are too many. You can't fight them all." Elias turned to her, his eyes glowing faint blue. "Then I won't fight alone." He raised the sword toward the fleet outside. Across every ship, human technology that had lain dormant suddenly activated. Old Terran vessels hidden within colonies and forgotten sectors woke up, responding to his signal. The ancient Terran AIs spoke as one voice. Command accepted. Guardian protocols online. Dozens of human-built warships, thought lost to history, appeared from hyperspace. Their hulls glowed with the same energy as the Sword of Silence. Lyra gasped as the fleet formed in perfect synchronization, surrounding the council station like a halo of fire. Each ship moved with precision, power, and purpose. No hesitation, no fear, the largest of them. An old Terran dreadnought named Erebus Rising, transmitted across all channels. "Humanity stands with the stars once more," the AI voice declared. The void creatures turned their gaze upon the fleet. Their screeches echoed across every frequency, warping reality itself. Elias lifted the sword high, and the Terran ships opened fire. But it wasn't normal energy, it was light, pure and ancient. Burning through darkness like dawn breaking through night, the void ships recoiled, their shadows tearing apart as the light consumed them. Lyra watched in awe, her voice trembling. "You're not just human, are you?" Elias smiled faintly. "We all are, just forgotten by time." The sword hummed. Brighter and brighter, its voice echoing across the stars. "Let them remember," it said. "Let them rise again." As the light spread, the void began to retreat. The creatures screamed one last time before dissolving into nothingness. For a moment the galaxy was silent again. Peaceful still, but Elias knew it wasn't over. He could still feel something vast moving beyond the edges of perception. He lowered the sword, breathing heavily. Lyra ran to his side, helping him stand. "You did it," she whispered. "You saved us." He shook his head slowly. "No, Lyra. This was only the beginning. Above them, space itself cracked again, and from the rift, a massive shape began to emerge, larger than any planet, older than time. Glowing with endless eyes of darkness, the true Void Monarch had awakened, and its gaze turned toward Elias. The light from the human fleet faded, leaving the sky painted in bruised purple and silver mist. Where the rift had opened, a new shadow now spread across the stars. It wasn't a ship or an army, it was a being. Immense and alive, the Void Monarch had awakened, its body stretching across whole worlds, its eyes glowing like dying suns. Every living creature in the system felt its presence pressing on their minds, whispering despair. Elias stood on the observation deck of the station, gripping the Sword of Silence tightly. The runes on the blade pulsed like a heartbeat. Faster and faster, Lyra stood beside him, her silver skin glimmering under the emergency lights. She could feel the pressure too, a cold weight on her chest making it hard to breathe. She looked at Elias and whispered, "It's not a creature. It's death itself." He nodded slowly, his expression calm though his hands trembled. "The sword says it remembers this darkness," he murmured. "It was made to face it once before." Across the system, human and alien ships struggled to hold position. Energy surges from the Monarch disabled weapons and drained shields. Communications failed, engines froze, and crews began to panic. Every voice on the command channel screamed the same words. "It's feeding on us." Elias turned toward Lyra, his voice steady though his eyes glowed faintly. "If I use the sword's full power, it can stop this," he said. Lyra's voice broke. "You'll die," he smiled softly. "Maybe that's the price." The Monarch moved closer, its mouth opening into a vast storm of shadow. Tendrils of darkness reached for the station, wrapping around it like chains. Metal groaned, glass shattered, and alarms blared. Lyra grabbed Elias's arm. "You can't face that alone," she cried. He looked at her, his gaze warm. "I was never alone." The sword hummed, responding to his heart, the runes shining brighter. Then the ancient voice returned, deep and resonant. "To end the void, you must give what cannot be returned." Elias nodded. "I understand," he whispered, though his heart felt heavy. He stepped forward as the walls cracked and the air shimmered with heat. The station trembled, ready to fall apart. But the sword's light began to spread outward. Lyra shielded her eyes as white fire surrounded him. He walked through the broken glass, floating into open space as if gravity no longer held him. The monarch's gaze turned toward him, and the stars around them dimmed to black, human. It spoke without words. "You are not the first to try." Elias raised the sword, his voice calm and certain. "Then I will be the last." The two forces collided, shadow against light, silence against creation. Waves of energy tore through the void, shattering moons and bending starlight. The human fleet retreated, unable to even approach the storm. Lyra screamed his name through the comms, but no signal reached him. From her ship's window, she saw only light and shadow twisting together. The sword of silence blazed with impossible brilliance, and the monarch's scream echoed through eternity. Then everything went quiet. The light vanished, leaving nothing but drifting debris and the silent hum of dying engines. Lyra's heart pounded as she looked at the empty space where Elias had been. "Elias?" she whispered, but there was no answer. Her eyes filled with tears as she pressed her hand to the cold glass. The sword of silence floated before her ship, cracked and dim, its glow fading like a dying star. She reached out with trembling hands as a faint voice whispered through the void. "Thank you, Lyra." Her tears fell freely, her voice shaking. "Come back." But the sword turned to dust, scattering into the cosmic wind. Across the galaxy, the void storms cleared, and light returned to the stars. The monarch's body dissolved into dust, leaving behind peace that felt almost unnatural. The fleets lowered their weapons, the transmissions filled with disbelief and silence. The Galactic Council broadcast the news. The human had saved them all, and for the first time in history, the galaxy mourned for one of Earth. Lyra returned to her homeworld, carrying a single shard of the sword. She placed it in the royal hall, where the sword of silence had once stood. The shard pulsed softly, like a heartbeat that refused to die. Years passed, but the legend of Elias spread beyond the stars. The humans who once were mocked became symbols of courage and faith. Children across alien worlds whispered his name in bedtime stories. They called him the human who faced the void. Lyra ruled wisely, carrying his memory in her heart. Every night she looked up at the stars, waiting for the faint hum she once heard. And sometimes in the quiet of dawn, she could feel his presence in the light. The sword might have vanished, but the bond it forged never truly ended. The galaxy had been saved by a human sacrifice. But his story had just begun. Centuries passed, and the galaxy healed from the scars of the Void War. New empires rose, new stars were colonized, and peace reigned longer than anyone had dared to dream. But throughout the 1,000 worlds, one name never faded: Elias, the human who faced the dark and never returned. They called him the Lightbearer, the Guardian of Silence, and the Last Starwalker. His story became more than legend. It became a belief, a hope that one soul could change the course of eternity. On the planet Varelia, beneath twin suns and crystal skies, a monument stood taller than the mountains. It was carved from the same metal that once formed the Sword of Silence, shimmering softly under the starlight. At its center, a single shard glowed faintly, beating like a heart that refused to rest. The Varelian people came from across the stars to see it, leaving offerings of light and flowers, and among them Lyra's descendants still ruled, carrying her bloodline and her vow to remember inside the royal archive. Lyra's final message remained preserved in crystal data. Her voice, though old and trembling, still carried the same warmth she once had. She spoke softly. He was more than human, but also the most human of us all. He faced the void with kindness, not rage. And when the sword asked for a heart pure enough to save us, his was the only one that answered. Her message ended with a whisper that echoed through history. The silence was broken, and because of him, we learned to listen again. 1,000 years later, humanity had returned to the stars. Their homeworld of Earth, once forgotten, was now the center of a vast alliance. Human ships carried banners of blue and silver, the colors of the Sword of Silence. Their captains spoke not of conquest but of remembrance. They called their fleets the Guardians, a tribute to the man who had become the soul of their rebirth. On the anniversary of the Void War's end, leaders from every world gathered on Varelia, The galaxy stood still as the Alliance unveiled a new statue beside the old monument. It was a towering figure of a man holding a sword made of light. His face was calm, his eyes gentle, his stance unbroken. At the base, the words were written in every language of the stars. He stood alone, so none would stand alone again. As the sun set, the shard in the old monument began to glow brighter. No machine powered it, no hand touched it, yet it pulsed with living energy. A soft hum filled the air. The same hum Lyra had once heard centuries ago. The crowd fell silent, eyes wide with wonder, and for a brief moment the light formed a silhouette. A tall figure standing beside the sword. Then a gentle voice whispered through every speaker, through every heart, "Guard the light, for I am always watching." The voice was faint but unmistakable. Elias's voice. Carried through the ages, scientists tried to explain it. Priests called it a miracle, but the people knew, deep within their hearts, that it was more than memory. It was his presence, his will woven into the stars themselves from that day onward. Ships that traveled near the edge of known space sometimes reported strange lights, a faint human figure walking along the hull, glowing softly, watching silently whenever danger approached. Those ships always returned unharmed, and every captain who saw the light said the same words: he was there. In time, the Sword of Silence became a symbol for peace, not war. Its image appeared on the flags of united worlds. Its story taught in every academy. Children learned not of conquest, but of courage, the kind that burns quietly and stands alone when others run. The galaxy no longer feared humanity. They followed them, for humans had proven something no weapon could. That strength was not in domination, but in heart. On one quiet night, a young girl stood at the foot of the monument. She was human, a student of the stars, her eyes full of curiosity. She looked up at the glowing shard and whispered, "Will I ever see you?" The wind stirred gently, the lights shimmered, and for just a heartbeat she heard a calm voice reply, "You already do." The girl smiled, tears glimmering in her eyes, and when she looked at the stars above, one of them flared brighter, as if winking back. From that moment, the people of every world understood something deeper. The legacy of Elias was not bound to time, or stone, or sword. It lived in every act of kindness, every stand against fear, every moment someone chose hope over despair. The void might return one day, as all darkness does, but as long as a single human heart still carried courage, Elias's light would rise again, and in the eternal silence between the stars, his whisper still lingered, "Be brave, little ones. The stars are yours now." And so, the galaxy moved forward, forever guided by the memory of one human who had once held the sword and lit the darkness for them all.